So basically they're playing good cop, bad cop with us, and we're totally falling for it.
Yeah, I think that was how these operations were run. It doesn't mean that they're intimately coordinating with the bad cop. You don't need to have that sort of coordination for this to be successful. There's a symphony of hardline, soft, moderate voices within the Chinese Communist Party, and I think it's more about being able to shape the direction of that symphony, being able to play a part in the more reformist seeming side of that. But I think one of the criticisms of the kind of stuff that I'm arguing is that China couldn't organize a conspiracy like this. What you're saying is that everyone has been briefed into this, that they're all part of it, but it just doesn't actually need to work that way. The MSS was strengthened by the fact that there were people coming out and saying things contradicting them. It gave them better access. It made them seem like more important partners for engagement.
Well, do you think this messaging is still effective? I mean, 2008 was already way too late to be saying China's going to become a democracy under the Chinese Communist Party. But especially at this point, can anyone really believe, if their, Chinese contacts are being we really are trying to become a democracy? It's just so transparent at this point that is not happening.
I think it's a lot. Yeah.
I was going to say, actually, that's the whole anti-Xi thing, really. Just take care of Xi. There's so many people in the party who, would reform, but Xi Jinping is the problem.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to go back to people believing China's about to become a democracy, but there are still ways to kind of tweak and manipulate the debate. You would have seen all of the supposed, sources and articles in the lead up to the 20th Party Congress claiming that Li Keqiang is going to seize power and that Xi Jinping is going to come out of this with his grip on power really limited and balanced by reformists and sort of these pro-Deng Xiaoping elders within the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, none of that has happened. We saw the exact opposite of that. And I don't know whether the MSS had a hand in that or whether that was deliberate, but I think it's an example of how these narratives of a reformist faction in the Chinese Communist Party, of a part that we can actually deal with, still has a lot of sway. And there's still this idea that if we're nicer to China, if we don't treat China like an enemy, it's not going to become an enemy. When there's so much evidence showing that maybe enemy is the wrong word, but that China has seen itself essentially as struggling against the West since the 1990s in various forms, and that now is the time to actually drop the facade.
It is interesting how a lot of the things are framed in that way, even in Antony Blinken's State Department speech, where he talked about it was like he had to go out of the way to refute the idea that America wanted a Cold War and all these things, that it was like he was trying to somehow counter Chinese Communist Party propaganda about those things. But it doesn't really matter what he said about it. They've already got their beliefs about it, but it's we think that if we just don't go there, if we just are very clear that that's not what we want, then they'll eventually believe us.
We already tried softer policies towards China that were meant to convince China that we had good intentions, that we were genuinely welcoming its rise. That was essentially how China policy was set, right up until the mid 2010s, if not even later. And it didn't work. So it's certainly not going to work now when the government is actually, enacting tougher policies on China, trying to destroy or hold back China's semiconductor industry, for example. There's no way, I think, to convince China that we welcome its rise, and for that to actually cause the Chinese Communist Party to change its policies, to become more open and liberal. It's just not an option in my belief.
Do you think that the China's peaceful rise thing was? Do you think it was so successful for so long because of that idea, because of the MSS?
So the actual origin story of peaceful rise is the MSS, essentially. So in about 1994, you had a new organization set up called China Reform Forum, this think tank. that was promoting economic reform in China. Its membership were mostly economists. But what people didn't realize was that it was actually run and founded by the MSS as a platform for covert operations, and its staff were MSS officers. And then somewhere around the 2000s, I think this group really changed. It kind of became more ambitious. It became attached to the Central Party School, which is really quite unique. This top training institution for Chinese leaders that I think at the time was presided over by Hu Jintao himself, and was later presided over by Xi Jinping. So to have an MSS group attached to the Central Party School, I think really signals kind of high-level political backing for its activities. And they signed on Zheng Bijian, a top sort of retired party official, as the figurehead of this group, but surrounded by MSS officers. And it was Zheng Bijian and China Reform Forum that actually first articulated the theory of China's peaceful rise at a 2003 Boao Forum speech, and then subsequently went to the US, went to Europe, went to Japan, promoting this idea. And for a brief period, it was repeated by Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao. Top Chinese leaders adopted this language of China's peaceful rise. It was then kind of changed to peaceful development because people within the party thought that peaceful rise was kind of a provocative framing that might scare people in the West, when it was designed to push back against this idea of China as a threat. But I think the kind of meme, the concept of China's peaceful rise has really stuck in people's heads, and it's often used as a way to characterize this broader idea of where China was going, even if the term itself had been dropped out of Chinese official language. And the very origin of that goes to the MSS, the formulation of it, and then the subsequent promotion of that is really all back to this MSS bureau, the 12th Bureau.
That's really incredible. I'm curious, what's been the initial response to your book? I mean, like, are some of these people who thanked all these MSS agents being like, "Oh wow, thank you for exposing that. I really made a mistake"?
Not really, to be honest. I had a couple of really great interactions with scholars who kind of realized they were dealing with MSS officers and were happy to talk about it, and talked about how, they'd been the targets of honeypot attempts and attempted extortion by these same MSS officers who were talking about peaceful rise. But a lot of other scholars, I think, seem to have genuinely believed that they were dealing with actual reformists inside the Communist Party or even inside the MSS, who wanted to help them build networks with democratic voices inside China. And it was a different period of engagement when the risks of this weren't understood. And it's an uncomfortable thing for people to have to reckon with the possibility that they were manipulated, or that their friends in China might not have been totally honest with them. But I think we're at a time when there's more appreciation that actually we did get China wrong, and that we should be reevaluating these past activities.
So give us a good honeypot story.
Well, the best one is this guy called Barry, who I write about in the book. I mean, maybe I'll give two if you don't mind. So the classic...
Please.
Yes.
Please. Shelley, leave the room.
The classic one is Bernard Boucicaut, this French diplomat in China in the 1960s.
Of course, the French would.
Yeah, exactly. Totally sexually inexperienced. I think it was his first diplomatic posting, and he was at a function and he fell in love with this Peking opera actress who was actually a man but specialized in female opera roles, and convinced Bernard that he was actually a woman who had to pretend to be a man. And Bernard, genuinely built a relationship with this actress, Xu Peipo. And at some point, the Chinese intelligence agencies recognized what was happening, used it to recruit Bernard as an agent, got him to pass classified information to them. And then they went so far as to convince Bernard that he'd fathered a child with this actress, and gave him a little Uyghur baby that they claimed was his.
How did they do that?
I'm wondering. There's certain mechanics that.
Yeah.
She was a man pretending to be a woman.
Yeah.
pretending to be a man, pretending to be a woman.
I think there's
something like that.
maybe one. I think this is where the sexually inexperienced part of it comes
Yeah.
into play.
Yeah, which is surprising because he was French.
Yeah, well, they know who to target, I guess. And yeah, he was so sexually inexperienced that I won't go into the actual mechanics of it, but you can look up some of the intrigue behind it. But he was so sexually inexperienced that he fell for this, and there's quite a sensational kind of court case that played out. There's a play based on it, and there's also a movie that you can watch called I think Madame Butterfly.
It's M. Butterfly.
M.
Because
Butterfly.
It's pun
Monsieur,
on Madame, but-
yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
Monsieur Butterfly, but M. Butterfly. I had to read that in college, actually.
Really?
This is all coming back to me.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
So it's okay.
So
So
Bernard,
so-
not a Giga Chad.